I walked into the courthouse convinced I was merely defending myself against slander, but as my stepmother sobbed for the cameras, I realized I had walked into the endgame of a chess match my grandmother had started months ago. Evelyn Hart did not build a nine-figure empire on blind faith. Somewhere in this building, encrypted footage was waiting to incinerate my stepmother's lies, and nobody saw it coming. My name is Camille Hart, and as I walked up the limestone steps of the Ridge County Justice Center, I felt less like a human being and more like a carcass being circled by vultures. The morning air in Ridgeport, Colorado, was biting, the kind of dry cold that settles in your lungs and refuses to leave. It was barely 8 in the morning, yet the sun was already glaring off the polished marble columns, blinding me just enough to make the gauntlet of reporters feel like a strobe-lit nightmare. They were shouting my name, but not with any respect. To them, I was exactly what the headlines had painted me to be over the last 3 weeks: the greedy granddaughter, the spinster accountant who swooped in to steal a fortune, the woman who manipulated a senile billionaire. I kept my face entirely neutral, a mask I had perfected over a decade of working in forensic accounting, where showing emotion was as dangerous as leaving a paper trail. I clutched my leather briefcase tighter, feeling the weight of the files inside. They were heavy, dense with facts, but facts rarely mattered in the court of public opinion. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly warm, smelling of floor wax and stale anxiety. I walked to the defendant's table alone. That was the first thing that made the spectators murmur. In a case involving an estate worth 9 figures, sitting alone was tantamount to suicide. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, dissecting my plain navy blazer and the lack of an entourage. They expected a team of high-priced sharks in Italian suits. Instead, they got just me, Camille, the woman who supposedly isolated her grandmother for profit. Across the aisle, the scene was staged to perfection. My stepmother, Sabrina, sat at the plaintiff's table. She was wearing a soft, beige cardigan that looked modest but probably cost more than my first car. Her hair was pulled back in a loose, slightly messy bun, calculated to make her look tired, selfless, and worn down by the burden of caretaking. She held a crumpled tissue in her hand like a prop, dabbing at dry eyes whenever she felt a camera lens shift in her direction. Next to her sat my father, Derek. He was staring at the grain of the wooden table, refusing to lift his head. His shoulders were hunched, and he looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the woman beside him and the lie he was agreeing to live. Seeing him there, letting Sabrina stroke his arm in a performance of supportive grief, twisted a knife in my gut that I had thought I was immune to. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted him to see his daughter, not the monster his wife had whispered into existence. But he kept his eyes down. Their lawyer, Lawson Pike, was a man who took up too much space. He was leaning back in his chair, confident, radiating the smug assurance of a predator who realizes the prey has a broken leg. He glanced at my empty table, then at me, and offered a pitying, tight-lipped smile. He thought I was arrogant for coming without counsel, or perhaps he thought I was broke because Sabrina had successfully frozen my access to the family funds. He did not know that I had not hired a lawyer because no lawyer knew the intricate web of Heartline Holdings better than I did. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice booming off the mahogany paneling. The Honorable Miriam Calder entered the room. I knew Judge Calder, not personally, but professionally, 5 years ago. I had testified in her courtroom as an expert witness for the Northbridge Integrity Group regarding a massive corporate embezzlement scheme. She was a no-nonsense jurist who detested theatrics and valued precision. As she took her seat and adjusted her glasses, her gaze swept the room and landed on me. I saw a flicker of genuine surprise behind her spectacles. She remembered me. She remembered me as the meticulous investigator who could trace a single dollar through shell companies in 3 different countries. Seeing me now, sitting on the defense side of an elder abuse and guardianship case, clearly threw her off balance. Sabrina must have sensed the judge's hesitation, because she immediately leaned into my father, squeezing his hand hard enough to turn her knuckles white. She turned her head slightly, pitching her voice in a stage whisper that carried perfectly to the reporters seated in the benches behind us. "She looks so cold, doesn't she?" Sabrina whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured sadness. "Even now, she is just sitting there calculating. That is all Camille has ever done. She only thinks about the money. She doesn't have a heart for family." The reporters scribbled furiously. The narrative was setting like wet cement. Judge Calder cleared her throat, bringing the room to order. "We are here to hear the petition for emergency guardianship and conservatorship regarding the person and estate of Evelyn Hart, filed by Sabrina and Derek Hart. Mr. Pike, you may proceed with your opening." Lawson Pike stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. He walked to the center of the room, avoiding the podium to create a sense of intimacy with the judge. "Your Honor," Pike began, his voice a rich baritone that sounded trustworthy and grave. "This is a tragedy, pure and simple. We are not here about money. Though the estate in question is substantial, we are here about safety. We are here about a beloved matriarch, Evelyn Hart, a woman who built an empire but who has, in her twilight years, fallen victim to the ravages of age." He gestured toward Sabrina, who sniffled on cue. "My clients, her devoted son and daughter-in-law, have watched helplessly as Mrs. Hart's mental faculties have declined, but that is natural. What is unnatural, what is cruel, is how the defendant, Ms. Camille Hart, has exploited that decline." Pike turned and pointed a finger directly at me. "Ms. Hart is a forensic accountant. She understands numbers, she understands leverage, and when the Heartline Holdings account swelled to over $400 million, Ms. Hart suddenly appeared. She inserted herself into Evelyn's life, isolating her from her son, firing longtime staff, and manipulating a confused elderly woman into altering legal documents." The air in the room grew heavy. The accusations were standard, but the specificity was damaging. Pike was painting a picture of a wolf in sheep's clothing. "We have affidavits," Pike continued, his voice rising in righteous indignation. "We have testimony that Ms. Hart restricted visitation, that she mocked her grandmother's confusion, that she treated Evelyn Hart not as a grandmother, but as a dying cash cow. We are asking the court to step in, to grant guardianship to Sabrina and Derek Hart, the only people who have consistently cared for Evelyn without asking for a dime in return." Sabrina let out a small, choked sob. My father handed her another tissue. It was a masterclass in manipulation. When Pike sat down, the room turned to me. It was my turn to object, to scream, to defend myself. But I remained seated. I remained silent. My hands were folded on the table in front of me. My face was a blank slate. In my line of work, I had learned that interjecting while a liar is spinning their web only helps them adjust the threads. You have to let them finish. You have to let them commit to the lie completely before you pull the rug out. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and thick, to the gallery. My silence looked like guilt. It looked like I had no defense. I could hear the whispers behind me, the scratching of pens. She's got nothing to say. She knows she's caught. Only Judge Calder seemed to look past the silence. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at me, then shifted to the large, color-coded stack of binders I had placed on the table. They were not the disorganized pile of a desperate person. They were labeled, tabbed, and cross-referenced. Calder knew my work. She knew I did not bring props to court. She knew I brought evidence. Pike leaned over to Sabrina and smirked. He thought the lack of an opening statement from me was a surrender. He thought I was overwhelmed. He was already mentally spending his commission. "Ms. Hart," Judge Calder said, addressing me directly, "do you have an opening statement?" I stood up slowly. "No, Your Honor. I believe the facts will speak louder than any narrative I could construct. I am ready to proceed with the evidence." Pike chuckled softly, a sound of disbelief. He thought I was incompetent. Judge Calder looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. She looked down at her docket, then back up at the room, her expression unreadable. "Very well," the judge said. "However, Before we proceed with the plaintiff's witnesses, there has been a slight change to the schedule. Given the gravity of the accusations, claims that the subject of this petition is entirely incapacitated and unable to speak for herself, the court finds it necessary to verify the current state of Evelyn Hart immediately. Sabrina stopped crying instantly. Her head snapped up. Pike frowned, his confident mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hart is frail. Bringing her into this contentious environment is exactly what is required to determine if she needs your protection, Counselor," Calder cut him off sharply. "And as I understand it, she is already here." The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom groaned as they were pushed open. The sound echoed through the silent room like a thunderclap. Every head turned. The reporters craned their necks. Sabrina gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning from white to translucent. My father finally looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and shame. A court officer held the door, and a wheelchair was pushed through the threshold. Evelyn Hart. She was 79 years old. She was wrapped in a simple wool shawl that draped over her thin shoulders. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, though her skin was translucent like parchment paper. She looked small, to the uninitiated eye. She looked exactly as Pike had described her, a fragile, elderly woman nearing the end of her life. But I knew better, and as she was wheeled down the center aisle, the silence in the room changed texture. It went from the silence of judgment to the silence of awe. This was the woman who had built Heartline Holdings from a garage operation into a global logistics empire in the 1970s, back when men wouldn't even sign a loan for a woman without her husband present. The wheelchair stopped in the open space between the plaintiff and defense tables. Evelyn did not look at the judge immediately. She did not look at me. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head toward the plaintiff's table. Sabrina froze. The devoted wife mask cracked. For a second, I saw the real Sabrina, the terrified grifter who realizes the mark is awake. My father shrank into his suit, unable to meet his mother's gaze. Evelyn's eyes were not cloudy. They were not confused. They were two chips of blue ice, sharp, assessing, and terrifyingly lucid. She looked at Sabrina, then at Derek, and then finally, she let her gaze drift to Lawson Pike. It was the look of a CEO inspecting a factory line and finding a defect. Then, she turned to me. She didn't smile. We had an agreement, an understanding that went beyond sentimental gestures. She gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. Judge Calder leaned forward. "Mrs. Hart, thank you for joining us. I understand this is difficult." Evelyn adjusted the shawl on her lap. Her hands were steady. When she spoke, her voice was not the wavering whisper Sabrina had imitated for the neighbors. It was quiet, yes, but it possessed a steel core that resonated in the high ceilings of the courtroom. "It is not difficult, Your Honor," Evelyn said, her diction precise. "What is difficult is watching a family destroy itself in the name of saving me. But I suppose that is why we are all here, to separate the theater from the truth." Sabrina gasped, a sound that was too loud in the quiet room. Pike stood up halfway, as if to object, but realized he couldn't object to the subject of the hearing simply speaking. I sat back in my chair and opened the first binder. The date on the tab read, "Inception of the scheme, 18 months ago." The trap was set, and they had all just walked right into the middle of it. To understand why I did not flinch when Lawson Pike called me a predator, and to understand why seeing my grandmother in that wheelchair was not a shock but a signal. You have to go back to the beginning, not to the boardrooms or the bank vaults, but to a peeling wooden deck overlooking the water in Clearwater Springs. That was where my education really began. My childhood was defined by the smell of pine needles and the sound of lake water lapping against the pylons of my grandmother's summer house. While other children were learning nursery rhymes, I was sitting cross-legged on the cedar planks, listening to Evelyn Hart talk about the difference between an asset and a liability. She did not speak to me like a child. She spoke to me like a future partner. She would look out at the water, a mug of black coffee in her hand, and tell me that money was not a goal. She said money was a tool, like a hammer or a saw. If you worshipped the hammer, you were a fool. If you used it to build something sturdy, you were an architect. But if you used it to hit people, you were just a thug with a heavy object. My mother died when I was 7 years old. It was a car accident, sudden and violent, the kind of event that cleaves a life into two distinct halves, the before and the after. My father, Derek, fell apart. He was a man who felt things loudly and messily. He drank too much, cried in front of the neighbors, and forgot to sign my permission slips. But Evelyn was different. She did not offer hollow platitudes. She did not hug me and tell me everything would be all right, because she knew that was a lie. Instead, she just showed up. Every day at 3 in the afternoon, her black sedan would be waiting at the curb of my elementary school. She would take me to her house, sit me down at the kitchen island, and make sure I did my math homework. When I had a piano recital, I would look out into the dark auditorium and see her silhouette in the third row, sitting perfectly straight. She never missed a single event. She filled the crater my mother left behind not with sugar and softness, but with a structural integrity that kept me from collapsing. She was the beams and the foundation. Then came Sabrina. I was 10 years old when my father brought her home. She was the perfect antidote to the chaotic grief that had ruled our house for 3 years. Sabrina was organized. She was shiny. She spoke in a voice that sounded like it had been calibrated to soothe anxious animals. She walked into our messy living room, looked at the piles of laundry and the unpaid bills on the counter, and declared that she was there to stabilize everything. My father looked at her like she was a life raft in the middle of a stormy ocean. For a long time, I thought she was saving us. She bought new curtains. She organized the pantry. She made sure my father wore ironed shirts. But even at 10, I felt a strange disconnect whenever she turned her attention to me. Sabrina was unfailingly polite. She never raised her voice, but her interactions with me felt like a performance. On my birthdays, there would be a mountain of gifts, expensive dolls, frilly dresses, things that a generic little girl would want. But I was a tomboy who liked logic puzzles and hiking boots. She never noticed. She would watch me open the presents with a tight, expectant smile, glancing at my father to make sure he was watching her be a good mother. She would ask me how school was. But before I could finish my sentence, her eyes would glaze over, or she would spot a speck of dust on the table that needed wiping. I learned very quickly that I was not a person to her. I was a prop in the play she was starring in, the one titled The Devoted Step-Parent. The dynamic shifted when they got married. With Evelyn's help, or rather, with what my father called loans, they moved us out of our modest 2-bedroom house and into a sprawling colonial in a gated community. That was when the whispers started. I would be doing my homework in the living room, and I would hear them in the kitchen. The tone of the house had changed. It was no longer about stabilizing, it was about acquiring. I heard Sabrina's voice, low and complaining, drifting through the hallway. She would say things like, "Caring for a difficult old woman is a full-time job." "Derek," she would say, "your mother uses money to control us. She acts like she owns us just because she wrote a check." Whenever I walked into the room, the conversation would die instantly. Sabrina would flash that bright, meaningless smile and ask if I wanted a snack, but the air was thick with resentment. I remember asking my father once if we were going to pay Grandma back for the house. Sabrina answered for him. She laughed, a tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes, and said that family doesn't keep score. Camille. But Evelyn kept score. She always kept score. She never spoke ill of Sabrina to me, not once. That was below her. But looking back, I see that she was running diagnostics. She was stress testing the system. When I was 13, Evelyn asked Sabrina to manage the catering budget for a small charity luncheon she was hosting. It was a simple task, involving a few $1,000s. I remember Sabrina complaining about the burden of it at home, rolling her eyes and saying Evelyn was treating her like a secretary. But she took the check. Weeks later, I was at Evelyn's house. She was sitting at her desk, looking at a ledger. She didn't know I was watching from the doorway. She traced a line on the paper with her finger, stopped, and then simply closed the book. She didn't scream. She didn't call the police. She just sat there for a long time, staring out the window. I know now that the numbers hadn't added up. Sabrina had likely skimmed a little off the top, or inflated the costs. It was a small amount, probably insignificant to a woman of Evelyn's wealth. But the amount wasn't the point. The integrity was the point. As I entered my teenage years, the tension in my house became a physical weight. My father was becoming more and more dependent on Evelyn's financial drip feed. Yet he resented the hand that fed him. He would come home after a meeting with her, red-faced and angry, muttering about how every dollar came with a lecture. He felt diminished by her success, and Sabrina fed that insecurity. She would massage his shoulders and tell him that his mother didn't respect him, that a grown man shouldn't have to beg for his inheritance. The breaking point, or rather, the moment the war truly began, happened during a Sunday dinner when I was 16. We were eating roast chicken in Evelyn's dining room. The atmosphere was strained. My father had been talking about a business venture that had failed, asking for another bailout. Evelyn had been asking hard questions about his business plan. Sabrina placed her hand over Derek's hand on the table. She looked at Evelyn with a face full of concern. "Mom," she said, her voice dripping with syrup. "Derek is so stressed. We all are. The paperwork you make him do, the meetings, it is too much. Maybe we should simplify things. Why don't we set up a power of attorney? Just for the administrative side. Let Derek handle the heavy lifting so you can relax. You are getting older. You shouldn't have to worry about these details." The room went silent. The grandfather clock in the hall seemed to tick louder. I looked at my grandmother. She was cutting a piece of chicken. She paused. She didn't look up immediately. She took a sip of water, patted her mouth with her napkin, and then looked at Sabrina. Her eyes narrowed. It was a tiny movement, a millimeter of a squint. If you didn't know her, you would have missed it. But I knew her. That was the look she gave a balance sheet when she found a discrepancy. That was the look of a trap snapping shut in her mind. She had just categorized Sabrina not as a nuisance, but as a threat. "We appreciate the offer," Evelyn said smoothly, "but I enjoy the details. The details are where the truth lives." Sabrina's smile faltered, just for a second, before she recovered and said, "Of course, we just want what is best for you." After dinner, while my father and Sabrina were arguing in hushed tones by the car, Evelyn called me out to the back patio. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. She sat in her wicker chair and motioned for me to sit on the steps near her feet. She looked tired. For the first time, I saw the age in her face, but her mind was clearly racing. "Camille," she said softly. "Yes, Grandma?" She leaned forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You have a good heart," she said, "but a good heart is not a shield. You are going to see things in this family that will confuse you. You are going to see people say they love you while they have their hands in your pockets." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to defend my father, but I couldn't find the words. She looked toward the driveway, where Sabrina was checking her reflection in the side mirror of the car Evelyn had paid for. "Listen to me," Evelyn said. "Watch how people behave around money and power. That is their true character. When they think nobody is watching, or when they think they are owed something, the mask slips. Never listen to what they say. Watch what they do." She sat back and looked at me with an intensity that frightened me. "One day, you might have to be the one who watches when I cannot. Do you understand?" I nodded, though I did not fully understand the weight of what she was asking. I was 16. I thought she was just being dramatic. I didn't know that she was already drafting the battle plans for a war that would not be fought for another 15 years. I didn't know that she was deputizing me. That night, as we drove home, Sabrina complained the entire way that Evelyn was becoming paranoid and senile. My father just drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, but I sat in the back seat, looking out the window, replaying that squint, the way Evelyn's eyes had narrowed. She knew. Even then, she knew, and she had planted the seed in my mind, a seed that would grow into the files currently sitting on the defense table in front of me. The years that followed were a blur of spreadsheets, subpoenas, and the quiet satisfaction of finding the one loose thread that unravels $1 million lie. I graduated at the top of my class and landed a position at Northbridge Integrity Group, a firm that terrified corporate executives and crooked CFOs alike. We did not just do taxes, we hunted. We were the people brought in when the numbers looked perfect, but the money was gone. I spent my 20s living out of a suitcase, tracing wire transfers through the Cayman Islands and dissecting shell companies in Delaware. To the outside world, I was becoming a hardened professional, a woman married to her job, but to Evelyn Hart, I was becoming a weapon. She followed my career with an intensity that I initially mistook for grandmotherly pride. She clipped every article where my name was mentioned in the trade journals. When we met for dinner, which was every Tuesday night without fail, she did not ask me about my dating life or when I planned to settle down. She asked me about methodology. She wanted to know how I caught the CFO of that mid-sized pharmaceutical company. She wanted to know the specific markers of vendor fraud. She would sit there, cutting her steak with surgical precision, and ask, "Tell me again how you linked the invoices to the fake address." Camille. I thought she was just fascinated by the puzzle of it all. I did not realize she was crowdsourcing a security system for her own life. One evening, we were sitting in her penthouse, the city of Ridgeport spread out below us like a grid of glittering circuits. We were drinking tea, Earl Grey, scalding hot. Evelyn set her cup down and looked at me with a peculiar intensity. "Let us play a game," she said. "A hypothetical." I smiled, used to this by now. "Okay, Grandma, what is the scenario?" She leaned back. Imagine a woman owns a company. She is aging. Her son and his wife are involved in the periphery of the business. The wife sets up a consulting firm. The firm produces no deliverables, but it bills the mother's company $10,000 a month. The mother signs the checks because she trusts them. How would you prove, in a court of law, that this was theft and not just bad business judgment? I leaned forward, my professional brain engaging. Well, first I would look for the contract. If there is no contract, that is a red flag. Then I would look for work product, emails, reports, timesheets. If the consulting firm has no other clients and no overhead, it is a shell. Then I would trace the money. If the $10,000 goes into the consulting account and immediately leaves to pay for a personal mortgage or a luxury car lease, you have piercing of the corporate veil. You have conversion of funds. Evelyn nodded slowly, absorbing every word. And if the mother is old? If they claim she knew and approved it because she was generous? Then you need a pattern. I said, you need to prove concealment. Did they hide the nature of the expenses? Did they prevent her from seeing the bank statements? Intent is the hardest thing to prove, but concealment is the smoking gun. She stared at me for a long time. "Concealment," she whispered. "Yes, that is the key." A few months later, the nature of our meetings changed. Evelyn started bringing me documents, not hypotheticals, but actual drafts of the new trust structures she was building for Heartline Holdings. She called it fun, asking me to look them over for holes. But as I flipped through the hundreds of pages of legalese, I realized she was building a fortress. She was creating blind trusts, charitable foundations with strict bylaws, and contingency clauses that triggered only under specific conditions of duress. It was during one of these reviews that I saw the first bleed. I was looking at the operating expenses for the Heartline charitable arm. There were a series of recurring payments to a vendor listed only as SH Management. The amounts were irregular but substantial. $5,000 here, $12,000 there. They were coded as logistics consulting. I cross-referenced the dates. April 14th. The same week my father and Sabrina posted photos of their new retreat cabin in the Rockies. June 2nd. The week Sabrina was seen driving a brand new Range Rover. My stomach turned. I looked up at Evelyn. She was reading a book, appearing completely unbothered. "Grandma," I said, keeping my voice steady, "who is SH Management?" She didn't look up. A vendor. Derek introduced them. Why? I hesitated. The coding is vague, and the payment dates align perfectly with some of Dad's larger personal purchases. Evelyn finally looked at me. Her face was unreadable. Is that so? I pushed the paper toward her. Grandma, they are siphoning money. It is not a lot compared to the whole pot, but it is theft. They are treating the company account like a piggy bank. We need to cut them off. We need to fire them. I expected her to be angry. I expected her to call Derek immediately. Instead, she just took the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it back in the folder. Not yet, she said. I stared at her. What do you mean? Not yet. They are stealing from you. If I cut them off now, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a temperature that chilled the room. They will spin it. They will say I am confused. They will say I forgot I approved it. They will say I am being vindicated and cruel. Derek will play the victim, and Sabrina will cry to the neighbors that I am abandoning my own son. No, Camille, in this world, being right is not enough. You have to be undeniable. She stood up and walked to the window. I decided to make some upgrades to the house. Security upgrades. I looked around the penthouse. It already had an alarm system. Not that kind of security, she said. Over the next few months, Evelyn hired a company I had never heard of called Luma Sentinel Solutions. They were not a local alarm company. They were high-end corporate surveillance contractors. She told me she wanted audit trails for physical reality. She had them install cameras in the common areas, the library, the office, and even the hallways. But they were not the bulky cameras you see in banks. These were pinhole lenses hidden in smoke detectors, in the spines of books, in the frames of paintings. She had microphones embedded in the chandeliers. But the genius of it was not the hardware, it was the data. She sat me down one afternoon and showed me the schematic on her laptop. Everything is encrypted, she explained. It does not go to a DVR in the closet where Sabrina could find it and smash it. It goes to the cloud. It is fragmented and stored on servers in 3 different jurisdictions. Luma Sentinel set it up so that even I cannot delete it once it is recorded. And then she showed me the fail-safe. She opened a terminal window, something a woman of nearly 80 had no business knowing how to use, and showed me a command line. There is a shadow account, she said, a dead account. It collects everything, the metadata, the audio, the video, the logs of who accesses the Wi-Fi, who prints what document. It is buried under layers of dummy data. She looked at me, her blue eyes sharp. Only someone with your specific skill set would know how to look for the discrepancy in storage size that reveals its location. I felt a shiver go down my spine. She was not just protecting herself. She was leaving a breadcrumb trail specifically for me. She was assuming that there might come a time when she could not tell me where the evidence was, so she was hiding it in the only language we both spoke fluently. Forensic data. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Evelyn closed the laptop. Because I am getting older. Camille, my body is tired. My heart has an arrhythmia that the doctors are watching. But my mind is sharper than it has ever been, and that is the danger. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was dry and cool. I have one final test to run, she said. And I am afraid the results will break my heart, but I need to know. I need to know if they love me, or if they are just waiting for me to die. Grandma, please, I begged, just rewrite the will. Put the money in a trust they cannot touch. Don't play this game. It is dangerous. Sabrina she is desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, Evelyn said, and I need them to make a big one. I need them to make a mistake so loud that no judge, no jury, and no reporter can ignore it. She squeezed my hand hard. If they ever try to take my voice, Camille, if they ever try to say I am unfit, if they ever try to use the law to bury me, that is the trigger. She had embedded a clause in her estate planning, buried deep in the bylaws of the trust. Any legal action taken to declare her incapacitated, any petition for guardianship, would automatically authorize the release of the Luma Sentinel data to specific parties. It was a dead man switch. If they played nice, if they cared for her, the footage would never see the light of day. It would just be an old woman's home movies. But if they attacked, if they tried to silence her, the system would scream the truth for her. At the time, sitting in that warm penthouse, I thought she was being paranoid. I thought she was preparing for a storm that would never come. I did not know that she was predicting the weather with 100% accuracy. I did not know that she was handing me the map to the battlefield I would be standing on 5 years later. She looked at me one last time that night and said, "Remember, Camille, when the time comes, do not look for the argument. Look for the data. The data never lies. People do." And now, standing in the courtroom, with Lawson Pike sneering at me and Sabrina dabbing her dry eyes, I realized the time had come, the test was over, and they had failed it spectacularly. The catalyst came in early November. It was a fainting spell, a transient ischemic attack, the doctors called it, that sent Evelyn to the VIP wing of Ridgeport General for 3 days. It was minor, a warning shot from a body that had been running at full throttle for nearly 8 decades. But to my father and Sabrina, it was not a medical event. It was the opening bell. Almost overnight, the dynamic in the penthouse shifted. For years, Derek and Sabrina had visited sparingly, usually when they needed a bridge loan or a signature for a guarantor agreement. But now they were omnipresent. They descended upon the penthouse with the aggressive cheerfulness of a reality TV crew. They brought boxes of pastries from the most expensive bakery in town, heavy with cream and fruit. Despite the fact that Evelyn was on a strict low-sugar diet, they brought framed photographs of themselves, placing them strategically on the mantelpiece and the side tables, physically crowding out the pictures of me and my mother. Sabrina began wearing pastels, soft pinks, baby blues. She pitched her voice an octave higher, adopting a tone one might use with a toddler or a golden retriever. She hovered. If Evelyn reached for a glass of water, Sabrina was there, pouring it before my grandmother's hand could even touch the crystal. "Oh, Mom, don't strain yourself," Sabrina would coo, smoothing a blanket over Evelyn's legs even though the thermostat was set to 72 degrees. "That is what we are here for, to make things simple." Simple, that was the word of the season. I would arrive after work, exhausted from chasing down discrepancies in corporate ledgers, only to find Sabrina holding court in the living room. She would be sitting with a notepad, talking to my father in hushed, serious tones while Evelyn sat in her armchair, gazing out the window. "Camille," Sabrina would say, flashing a smile that didn't show her teeth. "We didn't expect you. Derek and I were just discussing how to streamline the household bills. There is so much paper coming in. It is just too much for a woman in her condition." "Her condition?" I asked one evening, setting my briefcase down with a heavy thud. "She had a fainting spell. Sabrina. She didn't have a lobotomy. She is perfectly capable of handling her own bills." My father looked up, his face pained. "Camille, please, don't start. We are just trying to help. Mom is tired. Look at her." I looked at Evelyn. She did look tired. She was slumped slightly in her chair, her eyes half closed. When she reached for her reading glasses, her hand trembled. She knocked a pill bottle off the side table. It rattled across the hardwood floor, scattering white tablets everywhere. "Oh, dear," Evelyn murmured, her voice sounding thin and papery. "I am so clumsy lately. I can't seem to keep track of the time either. Is it morning?" Sabrina shot a look at Derek, a look of triumphant validation. "See?" she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "It is dangerous for her to be managing things alone. Derek, you need to step up. You are her son." Derek sighed, the sound of a man being crushed between his guilt and his greed. "I know, honey. I know." I moved to help Evelyn pick up the pills, but Sabrina beat me to it. She scooped them up, counting them, shaking her head theatrically. "It is okay. Mom, Derek will handle the pharmacy from now on. You just rest." I felt a surge of panic. I wanted to scream at them to get out. I wanted to shake Evelyn and ask her why she was letting them treat her like an invalid. But then, as Sabrina turned away to throw the contaminated pills in the trash, Evelyn looked up at me. She winked. It was so fast I almost missed it. A single sharp wink from her left eye, followed instantly by a return to the vacant, confused stare. My heart hammered against my ribs. She was acting. She was playing the role they had written for her, feeding them exactly the lines they needed to hear to feel confident. It was terrifying. It was brilliant. And it was the most dangerous thing I had ever seen her do. The exclusion began shortly after that. When I tried to join the weekend family meetings, Sabrina would text me an hour before, "Hey Camille, we decided to cancel today. Mom is feeling under the weather and needs quiet." Or, "Don't worry about coming over. Derek and I have the groceries covered. You work so hard. You should take a spa day." They were pushing me to the perimeter, building a wall of concern that I couldn't breach without looking like the aggressor. If I insisted on seeing her, I was disrupting her rest. If I asked about the finances, I was obsessed with the inheritance. But while they were busy managing the stage in the living room, they forgot that the theater was bugged. Every Tuesday, I would access the encrypted server from my laptop at home. The files from Luma Sentinel would download in heavy, silent blocks. Watching them was a nausea-inducing experience. I watched a video from the kitchen camera, timestamped 2 days prior. Sabrina was standing by the island, talking on her cell phone. Evelyn was in the other room, presumably asleep. Sabrina's voice was not soft. It was sharp and annoyed. "I don't know how much longer we have to play nurse," she snapped into the phone. "She is like a cockroach. She just keeps going. But she is slipping. Yesterday she forgot where she put her checkbook. I hid it in the pantry, but she thinks she lost it." She laughed, a cruel, grating sound. "Yeah, the lawyer said we need a documented history of decline," she continued. "If we can show a pattern of confusion for 6 months, the guardianship hearing will be a slam dunk, a rubber stamp, and once I have power of attorney, the first thing I am doing is liquidating that ridiculous portfolio and buying a place in Aspen. I am done with this rainy hellhole." She paused, listening to the person on the other end. "Camille," Sabrina sneered, "please, she's a glorified calculator. She has no social skills. Derek will handle her. He will tell her she is stressing her grandmother out. She will fold. She always folds." I closed the laptop, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. They were not just waiting for her to die. They were actively accelerating her decline, gaslighting her into believing she was losing her mind by hiding her possessions. But the real smoking gun didn't come from the cameras. It came from the numbers. I was at my desk at Northbridge Integrity Group, staring at a flagged transaction report from the Heartline Foundation. The system had alerted me to a variance. A transfer request for $50,000 had been initiated to a charity called the Clearwater Preservation Fund. On the surface, it looked legitimate. The fund existed, but something was wrong with the routing number. I dug deeper, peeling back the layers of the transaction. The routing number didn't go to the charity's main account. It went to a holding account at a digital bank known for its lax KYC, Know Your Customer, protocols. I looked at the authorization. It was digitally signed by Evelyn Hart. The timestamp was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I pulled the metadata. Every digital action leaves a fingerprint. A digital signature is not just an image of a name. It carries the DNA of the device that created it. The IP address for this signature did not originate from Evelyn's desktop computer in the library. It didn't come from her iPad. It originated from a device named MacBook Pro Sabrina 2023. She was not just gaslighting Evelyn. She was logging into Evelyn's accounts, using her credentials, and moving money while Evelyn slept. She was testing the fences. $50,000 was a lot to me, but to the estate, it was a rounding error. She wanted to see if anyone would notice. I printed the report. The pages felt hot in my hands. That evening, I bypassed Sabrina's gatekeepers. I used my key to the service elevator and went straight up to the penthouse. Sabrina and Derek were out to dinner, celebrating, no doubt, their progress. Evelyn was sitting in the library, reading a biography of Churchill. She looked frail, but when she saw me, she sat up straight. "You look like you have found a body," she said calmly. "Worse," I said. I laid the papers on the mahogany desk. "Sabrina forged your signature. She moved $50,000 to a shell account 3 nights ago. This is fraud. Grandma, this is a felony. We have her. We can call the police right now." Evelyn picked up the paper. She put on her glasses and studied the metadata. She traced the line that identified Sabrina's laptop. She didn't smile. She didn't look relieved. She looked sad. A deep, profound sadness that seemed to age her 10 years in a second. "She didn't even use a VPN," Evelyn said softly. "She is arrogant. She thinks nobody is watching because she thinks I am blind." "Grandma, we have to stop this," I urged. "This proves she is stealing. We don't need to wait for the guardianship petition. We can end it now." Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No, not yet." "Why?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How much more do they have to take?" "This is theft," Evelyn said. "But they will claim it was an error. They will claim I asked her to do it, and she used her laptop for convenience. They will claim the money was going to charity anyway. It is muddy. I need clear water." She looked me in the eye. "The net is tightening, Camille, but the fish is thrashing. I need to know that you found this on your own. Did the system alert you, or did you have to dig?" "The system flagged the routing number," I said, "but I had to dig for the device ID." "Good," she said. "Good. Keep digging, because they are going to get bolder. 50,000 is just the appetizer." The next week, the psychological warfare intensified. My father called me, his voice tight with manufactured worry. "Camille, we need to talk about your behavior," he said. "My behavior?" I asked, incredulous. "Sabrina says you are making accusations," Derek said. "She says you are going around telling people she is stealing. Do you have any idea how hurtful that is? She is washing your grandmother's sheets. She is cooking her meals, and you are acting like some paranoia case." "Dad, she is moving money," I said. "I have proof." "Stop it," he shouted. It was the first time he had raised his voice at me in years. "Just stop. You are jealous because Sabrina has stepped up and you haven't. You are trying to drive a wedge between us because you can't stand to see us happy. If you can't be supportive, maybe you shouldn't come around for a while." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling the tears prick at my eyes. He was my father, and he had just chosen a thief over his own daughter because the thief made him feel like a man, while I made him face his own inadequacy. 2 days later, I received a secure message from a contact at Luma Sentinel. It was marked urgent. I opened it. It was a report from the failsafe system. "Attempted access detected. Target. Asset account. 8849, the ghost account. Status, failed. Incorrect key. Origin, internal network. Heartline penthouse." I froze. Account 8849 was the trap. It was a dummy account Evelyn had listed in a fake ledger she left in her desk drawer. A ledger that supposedly contained emergency liquidity. It didn't exist, but someone in that penthouse had found the ledger, logged onto the network, and tried to crack it. They were hunting. They were looking for liquid cash. And the fact that they were looking for hidden accounts meant they were getting ready to make a move that required serious capital. I called Evelyn on her burner phone, a prepaid flip phone I had bought her, which she kept hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of War and Peace. "They tried the ghost account," I said as soon as she picked up. "I know," Evelyn said. Her voice was steel. "I got the alert. They are panicking. They must have debts I don't know about. They need a big infusion of cash. Fast." "What do we do?" "We wait," she said. "They tried to pick the lock and failed. Now, they are going to try to blow the door off the hinges. They will file the petition within the week. Be ready. Camille, get your binders in order." She hung up. I sat in my dark apartment, surrounded by the glow of my monitors. The game was no longer theoretical. They were coming for the throne, but they didn't realize that the queen they were trying to dethrone had already rigged the castle to explode. The transfer happened on a Tuesday morning, executed with the precision of a military extraction. By the time I arrived at the penthouse to check on Evelyn, she was already gone. The bed was stripped, the medical equipment was packed, and Sabrina was standing in the foyer directing movers with a clipboard in hand. She told me, with a voice dripping with false sympathy, that the doctors had recommended a specialized facility. She called it Serenity Heights. It sounded like a spa. It was actually a fortress. This move was strategic. By placing Evelyn in a private medical facility, Sabrina effectively became the gatekeeper. The nurses at the front desk had a list of approved visitors, and for the first 48 hours, my name was conspicuously absent. When I finally forced my way onto the list by threatening legal action, the visits were monitored. Sabrina or Derek would always be there, sitting in the corner, ensuring that I could not have a private conversation with my grandmother. They were suffocating her, cutting off her oxygen to the outside world, all while smiling and fluffing her pillows. But the isolation was only the first phase. The second phase was the character assassination, and it began not in the courtroom, but in the living rooms of our extended family. My phone started ringing with calls from aunts and cousins I had not spoken to in years. Their tone was always the same, a mix of confusion and accusation. They told me Sabrina had called them, crying, saying that I had seized control of all the accounts. She told them I had cut off Derek's allowance, that I was refusing to pay for Evelyn's medication, and that I was restricting family visits because I wanted to be the only beneficiary in the will. It was a lie so audacious that it was almost impossible to refute without sounding defensive. When I tried to explain that I had no legal power over the money yet, they just sighed. They had already bought the narrative. Sabrina had painted a picture of a lonely, confused old woman being held hostage by a cold, calculating granddaughter. I was the villain in a soap opera they were all watching avidly. Then they lawyered up. I learned later that Derek and Sabrina had retained Lawson Pike. Pike was a legend in Ridgeport, but for all the wrong reasons. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to burn the earth, not when you wanted to find a solution. He specialized in high-conflict probate cases and had a reputation for fighting dirty. Pike knew exactly how to play this. He listened to their sob story, the edited version where I was the monster, and he saw a gold mine. He advised them to stop asking for small favors and go for the jugular. He told them to file for emergency guardianship. The logic was ruthless. By filing for an emergency order, they could bypass the usual evidentiary hearings. They just needed to prove immediate danger. And to do that, they needed to show that Evelyn was mentally incompetent and that I was a predator. That was when the media campaign started. I walked out of my office building on a Thursday evening, my mind occupied with a forensic audit I was running for a client. The wind was biting, and I pulled my coat tighter. Suddenly, a bright light blinded me. Ms. Hart, do you have a comment on the allegations that you are isolating your grandmother? A microphone was shoved into my face. It was a reporter from a local tabloid news station, a man known for ambushing people in parking lots. Behind him, a cameraman was filming. I stopped, stunned. I have no comment, I said, trying to push past them. Is it true you have taken control of her assets? Are you waiting for her to pass away? The question hit me like a physical slap. I stared at him, my mouth open in shock. I realized then that this wasn't just gossip. This was a coordinated strike. Sabrina had fed them a story. She had likely tipped them off to my location. I got into my car, my hands shaking so hard I could barely put the key in the ignition. When I got home, I saw it, a segment on the evening news. They showed a photo of me leaving the penthouse a few months prior. In the photo, I was carrying 3 large banker's boxes. They were work files, my own files. But the caption on the screen read, "Granddaughter removes documents from Billionaire's estate as family pleads for access." It was followed by a clip from a popular local true crime podcast. The host, a woman with a breathy, conspiratorial voice, was outlining the tragedy of the Hart family. She described Sabrina as a heroic stepmother fighting a broken system, and me as the forensic accountant who knows how to hide the body, financially speaking. The narrative was set. I was the greedy professional using my skills to rob a helpless old lady. But the blow that hurt the most didn't come from the news. It came from my own sanctuary. Northbridge Integrity Group was my life. It was the one place where I was judged solely on my competence, where facts mattered more than feelings. The following Monday, I was called into the managing partner's office. The director of human resources was there, looking grim. "Sit down." "Camille," the partner said. "He didn't offer me coffee." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a formal notice of an ethics complaint. An anonymous tip had been filed with the state board and copied to the firm's leadership. The complaint alleged that I was using Northbridge's proprietary software and databases to conduct unauthorized investigations into my own family's finances for personal gain. It accused me of conflict of interest and misappropriation of company resources. I felt the blood drain from my face. The accusation was technically true. I had used my skills, though not the company's resources in the way they implied, but the context was twisted. "We have to open an internal review," the HR director said, refusing to meet my eyes. "Until the investigation is complete, we are placing you on administrative leave. We need your laptop and your badge." I stared at them. I had given this firm 7 years of my life. I had recovered millions of dollars for their clients. And now, because of a letter written by my stepmother, I knew it was her. The phrasing was identical to her texts. I was being stripped of my identity. I stood up, unclipped my badge, and placed it on the desk. The plastic made a hollow click against the wood. I walked out of the office past the cubicles of my colleagues. People stopped typing as I passed. They looked down or pretended to be on the phone. The whisper network was faster than fiber optics. They had already heard. "Camille is under investigation. Camille is stealing from her grandmother." I went home to a silent apartment. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by the binders that were now my only defense. I felt entirely alone. My father wouldn't speak to me. My career was in ashes. My reputation was being shredded on the internet. Sabrina had won. She had isolated me, discredited me, and was days away from legally seizing control of everything. But while I was crumbling, Evelyn Hart was working. In the sterile room at Serenity Heights, Evelyn was playing a much deeper game. She knew Sabrina was monitoring her calls, so she didn't use the phone. She knew the nurses were reporting to Sabrina, so she played the part of the docile patient during the day. But every time a doctor came in, a neutral third party, Evelyn made a request. "I would like a cognitive assessment, please," she would say clearly. "Today, right now." The doctors were confused. Why? "Because I want it in my file," she insisted. She forced them to administer the mini mental state examination and the Montreal cognitive assessment. She did this 3 times a week. She answered every question with deliberate precision. "What is the date?" "November 12th. "Who is the president?" "I know who it is." Count backward from 100 by sevens. 93, 86, 79. She was building a medical paper trail that contradicted every single affidavit Sabrina was preparing. She ensured the results were logged in the hospital's central server, which was legally distinct from the private notes the nurses might be keeping for Sabrina. And then, she deployed the bomb. Evelyn had written a letter months ago. It was handwritten on her personal stationery. She had sealed it in a thick manila envelope and given it to a trusted courier service with strict instructions on when to deliver it. On the same morning that Lawson Pike filed the emergency petition for guardianship at the courthouse, a courier walked into the Ridge County Justice Center. He bypassed the filing clerks and went straight to the chambers of Judge Miriam Calder. He handed the envelope to the judge's clerk. The front of the envelope read, "To be opened only in the event of a guardianship petition filed against Evelyn Hart." Inside that envelope was not a plea for mercy. It was an instruction manual. It contained a single page of handwritten text. "Dear Judge Calder, if you are reading this, then my son and his wife have finally made their move. They will tell you I am confused. They will tell you I am in danger. They will ask you to silence me for my own good. I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to look at the data. I have authorized a third-party security firm, Luma Sentinel, to grant the court temporary access to a secure archive. The access code is below. Do not grant the guardianship until you have seen what I have seen. Do not let them steal my life in the dark. Sincerely, Evelyn Hart." Back in my apartment, I didn't know about the letter. I was watching the rain hit the window, feeling the walls closing in. I thought I had lost. I thought the villain had better PR, better lawyers, and better luck. I didn't know that across town, in the judge's chambers, a clerk was slicing open an envelope that would turn the courtroom into a slaughterhouse. I didn't know that Evelyn had not just set a trap. She had already baited it, and Sabrina had just clamped her jaws around the trigger. The phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Hart? This is the clerk for Judge Calder. Yes, I answered, my voice hoarse. You are listed as a respondent in a petition filed this morning. The hearing is set for tomorrow at 9 o'clock. And Ms. Hart? Yes. Bring your files. The judge wants to see everything. The moment I hung up the phone with the court clerk, the paralysis of the last few days evaporated. The fear that had been sitting heavy in my chest was replaced by a cold, familiar hum. It was the same sensation I felt when I cracked a complex money laundering case or found the hidden ledger in a bankrupt company. It was the feeling of the hunt. I realized that crying would not save me. Begging my father would not save me. Only the data would save me. I turned my apartment into a war room. I pushed the coffee table against the wall and covered every inch of my floor with documents. I categorized them by color: red for financial transactions, blue for medical records, yellow for communications, green for the Luma Sentinel logs. I was not a granddaughter anymore. I was a forensic accountant, and my client was the truth. I started with the money. I pulled the raw transaction data for Heartline Holdings going back 3 years. I didn't look at the summaries. Summaries can be faked. I looked at the metadata of the wire transfers. I spent 12 hours staring at the screen, my eyes burning, until the pattern finally emerged. It was subtle. Buried in the miscellaneous administrative expenses category, there were recurring payments to a vendor listed as Vancorp Solutions. The name sounded generic enough to be ignored by a standard auditor, but it triggered a memory. Vance was Sabrina's maiden name. I traced the payments: $5,000 here, $8,000 there. The amounts were always just below the $10,000 threshold that would trigger an automatic flag for review by the external banking regulators. It was smart, but it was also predictable. I followed the money from Vancorp Solutions. It didn't go to overhead or payroll. It went to a personal account at a digital bank, and from there, it vanished into a volatile cryptocurrency exchange. Sabrina wasn't just stealing, she was gambling. She was pouring Evelyn's legacy into the most speculative market on earth, likely trying to cover losses that were mounting by the day. I found payments for a luxury lease on a villa in Cabo San Lucas, paid for 3 months in advance. I found a purchase order for a custom diamond bracelet, invoiced as office equipment. She was bleeding the company dry, one small cut at a time. But financial fraud was only half the battle. I needed to prove the isolation. I needed to prove that the narrative of the caring stepmother was a fabrication designed to facilitate the theft. I opened my contact list and began to dial. I tracked down the staff who had been fired in the last 2 years. I met a former nurse, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, at a diner on the edge of town. She was nervous, constantly checking the door, but she was angry. She told me that Sabrina had systematically cut the nursing hours. She told us that your grandmother didn't like strangers in the house, Mrs. Higgins said, stirring her coffee aggressively. But that wasn't true. Mrs. Hart loved the company. It was Sabrina. She wanted the house empty. She prohibited us from keeping detailed logs of Mrs. Hart's lucid moments. If Mrs. Hart had a good day, Sabrina would tell us not to write it down because it might confuse the doctors. Then Mrs. Higgins told me something that made my blood run cold. About 6 months ago, Mrs. Hart started having trouble with her balance, she said. I recommended installing safety rails in the hallway and the bathroom. Standard procedure. Sabrina refused. She refused? I asked, my pen hovering over my notebook. She said it would ruin the aesthetic of the penthouse. Mrs. Higgins said, She said, I don't want this place looking like a hospital. It will make her feel weaker, but I knew what she was doing. She wanted Mrs. Hart to fall. She wanted her to look unstable. Every time Mrs. Hart stumbled, Sabrina would look at her husband and say, "See? She is failing." It was psychological torture. I wrote it all down: the date, the time, the exact quote. This wasn't just negligence. It was a calculated campaign to degrade Evelyn's physical confidence so that her mental state would follow suit. The next piece of the puzzle was the technology. I needed to understand the scope of what Evelyn had hidden. I managed to set up a meeting with a junior analyst from Luma Sentinel, a young man named Kevin who had been part of the installation team. We met in the back of a noisy arcade, a place where our conversation wouldn't be overheard. Kevin looked terrified. He kept his voice low. "You don't understand," Kevin said. "The system your grandmother asked for, it is not normal. It is military grade. The core servers are completely black-boxed. Even I can't access them." "Who can access them?" I asked. "Nobody," Kevin said. "Not without the key. It is designed as a dead man's switch. The system is dormant, just collecting data, terabytes of it, audio, video, keystroke logs, but it is encrypted with a dual-key system." "How does it open?" I pressed. "It is triggered by a specific legal event," Kevin whispered. "Your grandmother set it up so that if a guardianship petition is filed against her, the system goes into a ready state, but to actually unlock the files for the court, she has to authenticate it personally. She has a physical token. If she is declared incompetent before she can use that token, the system wipes itself. It self-destructs to protect her privacy." I felt a chill go down my spine. Evelyn had bet everything on one moment. She had set a trap that required her to walk into the courtroom and pull the trigger herself. If Sabrina succeeded in getting the emergency order and silencing Evelyn before she could testify, the evidence would vanish. The truth would be deleted forever. The guardianship petition filed this morning was the key turning in the lock. The system was awake. Now, I just needed to make sure the operator survived to push the button. I tried to get to Evelyn. I drove to Serenity Heights, the private facility where she was being held. The building was sleek and modern, all glass and steel, but it felt like a prison. When I approached the front desk, the receptionist didn't even look up. "I am here to see Evelyn Hart," I said. "Name?" "Camille Hart. I am her granddaughter." The receptionist typed something into her computer, then frowned. "I am sorry. Mrs. Hart is not accepting visitors. Her medical proxy has indicated that she is in a fragile state, and agitation must be avoided." "I am not going to agitate her," I said, keeping my voice level. "I just want to see her." "I can't allow it," the woman said. "Strict orders from Mrs. Sabrina Hart. If you refuse to leave, I will have to call security." I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. That is what Sabrina wanted. She wanted footage of me being dragged out of the hospital, looking hysterical. Instead, I pulled out my phone. "Can you please state for the recording that you are denying access to a direct family member based on the instruction of the petitioner in an active guardianship case?" I asked. The receptionist froze. I am just following protocol." "Thank you," I said. That is all I needed. I walked back to my car and added the interaction to my timeline. I logged every blocked call. I printed every email that had bounced back. I created a visual map of the isolation. It showed a clear, undeniable pattern. The moment Sabrina filed for control, the walls went up. It wasn't about care. It was about silencing the witness. Late that night, digging through an old backup drive of my own email, I found something I had forgotten. It was an email thread from 3 years ago. Evelyn and I had been discussing the future of Heartline's profits. In the email, Evelyn wrote, "Camille, I want to explore setting up a scholarship fund for underprivileged engineers. I want the money to do good work after I'm gone. I do not want it to sit in a vault." It was a direct contradiction to the statement Sabrina had given to the press yesterday, where she claimed, "Evelyn never cared about charity. She only cared about hoarding her wealth." I printed the email. It went into the yellow binder. The final piece of hope came from an unexpected source. I was at the courthouse early the next morning, filing my response to the petition. I was exhausted, running on caffeine and adrenaline. A young clerk, A woman I recognized from a money laundering trial I had testified in years ago, walked past me. She didn't stop. She didn't look at me directly. But as she passed, she slowed down just enough to whisper, "Judge Calder spent 3 hours last night reading up on digital chain of custody laws," she murmured. And she asked for the technical specs on the courtroom's multimedia system. I watched her walk away, my heart pounding. Judge Calder wasn't just reading the motions. She was preparing for a show. She had smelled the rat. She knew that a woman like Evelyn Hart didn't disappear without leaving a trace. The judge was curious about the security system. I looked down at my heavy briefcase. I had the timeline. I had the financial forensics. I had the witness statements about the isolation. But the ultimate weapon was still locked in a server, waiting for an 80-year-old woman to stand up and speak. I took a deep breath and walked toward the double doors of courtroom 4B. It was time to go to war. With the legal machinery in motion, Sabrina abandoned the pretense of a fair fight and moved the battlefield to the one place where evidence did not matter: the human mind. She stopped attacking my legal standing and started attacking my sanity. It began with the text messages. They arrived in a steady, rhythmic dripping, like a leaky faucet in the middle of the night. They were not threatening. They were far more insidious than that. They were dripping with a manufactured, sickly sweet concern that made my skin crawl. "Camille, honey," one read, "arriving at 2 a.m. I know you are under a lot of stress at work. Derek and I are so worried about your mental health. Maybe you should step back from the court case? It is destroying your reputation. We just want you to be okay." Another followed hours later. "I found a great therapist in the city. I think you should talk to someone about your obsession with money. It is not healthy to project your issues onto Evelyn. Let us handle the heavy lifting." She was gaslighting me via SMS, creating a digital paper trail where she looked like the concerned mother figure, and I looked like the unstable, spiraling daughter. If I responded with anger, she would use it as proof of my volatility. If I didn't respond, she would claim I was withdrawing and isolating myself. Then came the internet. I made the mistake of checking the comment section on the article the local news station had posted about the guardianship hearing. It was a bloodbath. Hundreds of comments, many from anonymous accounts created just days ago, were painting a portrait of a monster. I went to high school with her. One comment read, "She was always cold, calculated, never had any friends, just cared about grades and money. Not surprised she's abusing her grandmother." Another wrote, "My cousin worked at Northbridge. Rumor is she uses company software to spy on her own family. A real predator. She shouldn't have a license." I knew, logically, that these were likely bots or paid trolls, or perhaps Sabrina's bridge club friends rallied to the cause, but logic does not stop the sting. Reading strangers dissect my character, accusing me of the very greed I was fighting against, felt like being stripped naked in a town square. They called me a vulture, a spinster, a parasite. They took the thing I was most proud of, my professional competence, and twisted it into a weapon. But the digital assault was just the opening barrage. The real emotional shrapnel came from my father. I was sitting in my makeshift war room, highlighting a bank statement, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. It was Derek. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the play button. I wanted to believe he was calling to apologize. I wanted to believe that somewhere inside the man who had once carried me on his shoulders, there was a father who saw me. I pressed play. "Camille." His voice was slurred, heavy with scotch and rage. "I hope you are happy. You have done it. You have finally done it. Mom won't even look at me. You have poisoned her against her own son. Sabrina is crying in the bathroom right now because of the lies you are spreading about her." He paused, and I could hear the jagged intake of his breath. "You think you are so smart with your files and your investigations, but you are just cold. You have always been cold. Just like you are. If you don't stop this, if you don't drop this petition and let us take care of her, then don't bother coming to Christmas. Don't bother calling on my birthday. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a daughter. I have a plaintiff." The message ended with a harsh click. I sat there for a long time. the silence of the apartment ringing in my ears. He hadn't just chosen a side. He had rewritten history to justify his betrayal. He had turned me into the villain so he wouldn't have to face the fact that he was a coward. The next day, the escalation turned professional. A clip started circulating on a local gossip blog. It was grainy footage, clearly taken from a cell phone, showing me in the hallway of the penthouse about a year ago. In the video, I was shouting, "It is not working. The system is broken. How can you be this incompetent?" On the screen, it looked like I was screaming at Evelyn. The caption read, "Granddaughter berates confusing elderly billionaire in shocking outburst." The truth? I had been on the phone with the internet service provider because the Wi-Fi in the penthouse had gone down, cutting off Evelyn's access to her audiobooks, and the technician had been rude. Evelyn had been sitting next to me, laughing at my frustration, but in the edited clip, the laughter was cut, the context was stripped. All that remained was my angry face and a fragile old woman sitting nearby. It was a deep fake of context, and it was enough to spook my firm. I was summoned to the office of the managing partner at Northbridge the next morning. The mood was somber. He didn't ask me to sit. He handed me a letter on heavy, cream-colored stationery. The letterhead belonged to Pike and Associates. It was a cease and desist letter, but it was also a threat. It accused me of using proprietary forensic accounting methodologies to harass and intimidate private citizens, namely, Sabrina and Derek Hart. It hinted that if Northbridge did not rein me in, the firm would be named as a co-conspirator in a harassment lawsuit. "Lawson Pike is playing hardball," my boss said, leaning back in his chair. He looked tired. "He is threatening to drag the firm's reputation through the mud. He says you are acting as a rogue agent." "It is a lie," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "I am investigating fraud. I am protecting a vulnerable client who happens to be my grandmother." "I know," he said quietly. I looked at him, surprised. "I know Pike," he continued. "He is a shark, and sharks don't attack unless they smell blood in the water. If they are coming this hard at you, it means you are close to something they don't want you to find." He stood up and walked to the window. "However, the firm cannot be seen taking sides in a family dispute. The optics are terrible. The board is demanding I cut you loose." I felt the floor drop out from under me. "Are you firing me?" "No," he said, turning back to face me. "I am suspending you, indefinitely, without pay, until the legal matters are resolved." He saw the devastation on my face and held up a hand. "But Camille, I am not confiscating your knowledge. You are suspended from accessing the firm's live databases. But if you were to, say, keep copies of your personal investigation templates, the spreadsheets you built yourself, well, I can't police what you have on your personal hard drive." He looked me in the eye. "You are on your own, Hart, but I suspect you are better at this than they are. Don't let them win." I walked out of the building carrying a box with a few personal items, feeling a strange mix of loss and liberation. They had stripped me of my title, my salary, and my institutional support, but they hadn't taken my brain. That night was the hardest. The apartment felt too big and too quiet. The adrenaline that had fueled me for weeks was crashing. I poured a glass of wine but didn't drink it. I sat on the floor, looking at a framed photograph of my mother. She was laughing in the picture, holding me when I was 5 years old. She looked warm, soft. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I saw the sharp lines of my blazer, the dark circles under my eyes, the tightness in my jaw. Was Derek right? Was I cold? I had spent my whole life trying to be the opposite of him. He was emotional, chaotic, and weak. I was logical, organized, and strong. But in doing so, had I shut down the part of me that was human? Was I fighting for Evelyn because I loved her? Or was I fighting because I needed to win? Was I just another Hart, using money and power to fill a void where love should be? I buried my face in my hands. The doubt was heavier than the fatigue. I felt like giving up. It would be so easy to sign the settlement, take a payout, and walk away. I could move to a new city. Start over. Let Sabrina have the victory. Then, a knock at the door. I didn't move. I didn't want to see anyone. But then I heard a sound. Paper sliding under the door. I waited a full minute before I got up. I walked to the entryway and picked up a small, folded piece of paper. It was plain notebook paper, the kind they use in hospitals for charts. I unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky. The letters slightly formed, but the slant was unmistakable. You are not losing. You are gathering. Let them build their gallows higher. The drop will be that much longer. It was unsigned. It must have been smuggled out by the sympathetic nurse, the one who had tipped me off about the safety rails. Evelyn knew, even from her locked room, even through the fog of medication they were likely giving her. She knew I was wavering, and she was reminding me of the mission. I was not losing. I was gathering. I taped the note to the wall above my computer monitor. I wiped my face. I sat back down. 2 hours later, the intercom buzzed. It was 11 at night. "Who is it?" I asked. "It is me, Sabrina." Her voice was thick, clogged with tears. I stared at the intercom. This was it, the final gambit. She knew the hearing was 2 days away. She knew I had been suspended. She thought I was broken. She was coming to collect the carcass. "Come up," I said. I spent the 2 minutes it took for the elevator to rise setting the stage. I turned off the main lights, leaving only a lamp on. I put the wine glass on the table to look like I had been drinking. I slumped my shoulders. I needed to look defeated. But before I opened the door, I took my phone, set it to airplane mode to prevent interruptions, opened the voice memo app, and placed it screen down on the coffee table, hidden under a stack of magazines. I opened the door. Sabrina stood there. She was wearing a trench coat, her hair wet from the rain. Her makeup smeared artfully under her eyes. She looked like a tragic heroine. "Camille," she sobbed, stepping into the apartment without asking. "Oh God, look at you. Look at us. This is madness." She paced the room, wringing her hands. "I can't take it anymore. Derek is a wreck. He is drinking again. The press is camped outside our house. Is this what you wanted? To destroy the family?" I stood by the kitchen island, arms crossed, watching the performance. "You started this, Sabrina. You filed the petition." "Because I had to," she cried, spinning around. "To save her, and to save us. Do you think I want to be in court? I want peace." She walked over to me and grabbed my hands. Her palms were damp. "Let's end this," she whispered. "Right now, just you and me. We don't need lawyers. I have a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "We dropped the guardianship petition," she said, her eyes widening with feigned sincerity. "We set up a co-trusteeship. You and me. We make decisions together. You can handle the investments, the boring stuff you love. I will handle the care, the house, the day-to-day. We split the control, 50-50. It was a bribe. She was offering me a seat at the table she had stolen. "And what about the investigation?" I asked. "What about the missing money?" "We bury it," she said quickly. "We call it a misunderstanding. We tell the court we resolved our differences. Camille, think about it. If we go to court on Friday, one of us loses everything. If you lose, you are ruined. If I lose, well, I won't lose. Lawson says we have it in the bag. But I am offering you a lifeline because I care about you. Everyone will forgive you if you stop now." She was good. She was terrifyingly good. She was offering me an escape route from the hell she had created. I walked over to the coffee table and sat down near the phone. I rubbed my temples, acting the part of the exhausted, broken woman. "I don't know. Sabrina," I murmured. It is so much money. The transfers to Vancorp, the crypto. How do we explain that?" She sat down next to me, invading my space. She lowered her voice, the mask of the grieving daughter slipping just enough to reveal the greed underneath. "We don't explain it," she hissed. "It is family money. Camille, it is meant to be used. Evelyn doesn't even know it is gone. She is sitting on a mountain of cash she can't take with her. Why shouldn't we enjoy it? Why shouldn't Derek have the life he deserves? But it is not ours, I said, pushing her slightly. It is hers. Sabrina laughed, a harsh barking sound. It is ours by right. I wiped her mouth when she drooled. I listened to her boring stories for 10 years. I earned every cent of that transfer. And you? You just want to lock it away in some charity fund for strangers. She leaned in close, her eyes hard and shiny. I am not stealing Camille, she said, and every word was clear, sharp, and destined for the microphone hidden inches away. I am just taking back what belongs to us before you give it all away to the world. I am securing our future, and if I have to paint you as a villain to get it, I will, but sign the deal, and we can both be rich. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had haunted my childhood, the woman who had manipulated my father, the woman who was trying to bury my grandmother alive. Get out, I said. She blinked, confused by the sudden change in my tone. What? Get out of my apartment, I said, standing up, my posture straightened, the fatigue vanished. Sabrina stood up, her face twisting into a sneer. You are making a mistake, a massive mistake. You are going to walk into that courtroom alone, and Lawson is going to eat you alive. Maybe, I said, walking to the door and holding it open. But I won't be the one begging. She stormed out, the click of her heels echoing down the hallway. I locked the door. I walked back to the coffee table. I lifted the stack of magazines and picked up my phone. I stopped the recording. I pressed play. I am just taking back what belongs to us before you give it all away. I am securing our future. If I have to paint you as a villain to get it, I will. The audio was crisp, clear, undeniable. I saved the file. I backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. Then, I picked up the yellow binder and placed a fresh tab on a new section. The war room was closed. The investigation was over. Now, it was time for the execution. The date for the hearing was set for November 15th. It loomed on the calendar like the edge of a cliff. As the day approached, the media circus camped out on the steps of the Ridge County Justice Center grew from a handful of local reporters to a swarm of national affiliates. The story had legs now. It had all the ingredients of a primetime drama: a reclusive billionaire, a wicked stepmother, a greedy granddaughter, and a fortune at stake. Sabrina was feeding the beast daily. She had hired a crisis management firm, a boutique agency from Denver that specialized in rehabilitating the images of politicians caught in scandals. They went to work immediately. Suddenly, the tabloids were flooded with leaked photos from inside Serenity Heights. There was Sabrina, bathed in soft, golden light, reading a book of poetry to Evelyn. There was Sabrina, holding Evelyn's hand while looking out a window with a wistful expression. The captions were nauseatingly curated: a daughter-in-law's devotion and fighting for dignity in the twilight years. I knew the photos were staged. I knew that 5 minutes before the shutter clicked, Sabrina had probably been checking her stock portfolio, and 5 minutes after, she was likely yelling at a nurse, but the public did not know that. To them, she was Florence Nightingale in designer knitwear. But Evelyn Hart was not going to be a silent prop in Sabrina's photo op. Despite the frantic objections of her doctors and the vehement protests of Lawson Pike, who argued that the stress would kill her, Evelyn demanded to be present at the hearing. She sent a formal request to the court through her court-appointed guardian ad litem. She requested to be transported to a secure holding room within the courthouse, away from the cameras, where she could rest until she was called. Judge Calder granted the request. Furthermore, the judge issued an order that sent a shockwave through Sabrina's camp. She ordered 2 independent cognitive evaluations to be performed 48 hours before the trial. These were not to be done by the facility's staff, who answered to Sabrina, but by forensic psychiatrists appointed by the state. The order was explicit. No family members are to be present during the evaluations, no interference, no coaching. This was the first crack in the dam. Sabrina could control the nurses, but she could not control a court-appointed psychiatrist. While Sabrina was managing her image, I was managing the truth. I spent the final week in my apartment, which had fully transformed into a command center. I called in a favor from Milo Reyes. Milo was a senior investigator at Northbridge, a man with a mind like a steel trap and a cynical sense of humor that matched my own. He was one of the few people at the firm who hadn't bought into the rumors. When I told him I needed someone to tear my case apart so I could rebuild it, he showed up with a six-pack of energy drinks and a red marker. "Convince me," Milo said, pacing my living room while I stood by my wall of evidence. "I am the judge. I am tired. I am hungry, and I think you are a spoiled brat who wants a payout. Go." "I don't want the money," I said, pointing to the timeline. "Look at the flow of funds. The withdrawals match Sabrina's travel dates perfectly." "Circumstantial," Milo barked, uncapping the red marker. "Rich people spend money. Sabrina has power of attorney. She is allowed to spend money on lifestyle maintenance. Prove it is theft." "It is concealment," I countered, flipping to the section on Vancorp Solutions. "She routed the money through a shell company. If it was lifestyle maintenance, she would have used the main credit card. She hid the transaction. You only hide what you know is wrong." Milo paused, looking at the bank trace. "Better. But Pike will say she did it for privacy. He will say she didn't want the staff gossiping about how much she spends on shoes. You need more." "I have the isolation," I said. "I have the logs of blocked calls." "So she is a protective gatekeeper," Milo shrugged. "That is her job. You need a smoking gun. Camille, you need intent." I looked at the black binder on the table, the Luma Sentinel file. "I have the intent," I said quietly. "But I can't show it to you." I had met with Kevin, the young Luma Sentinel analyst, one last time. We met in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner at 3 a.m. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "The fail-safe archive is active," Kevin told me, his breath visible in the cold air. "When Pike filed the petition, the system woke up. It is holding about 3 terabytes of data in a temporary cache." "Can we download it?" I asked. "No," Kevin shook his head violently. "That is the security protocol. It is a biometric lock. The system generates a unique, rolling encryption key that matches a physical token your grandmother carries. To open the files for the court, she has to physically plug the token into the terminal and enter a sequence that only she knows. If she gets it wrong 3 times, or if she doesn't do it within the allotted window of the hearing, the cache purges. It deletes everything, forever." "Why would she design it that way?" I asked, frustrated. "It is too risky." "Because she wanted to make sure that if she was truly gone, mentally gone, her private life wouldn't be exposed to the world," Kevin explained. "She only wanted this used if she was lucid enough to choose to use it. It is the ultimate test of her competency. If she can't open the box, then the box shouldn't be opened." It was terrifyingly brilliant. Evelyn had bet her entire legacy on her own ability to stand before a judge and perform a complex technical task under extreme pressure. If Sabrina had succeeded in drugging her into a stupor, or if the stress caused a stroke, we would lose. The evidence would simply evaporate. Sabrina and Pike must have sensed the danger. 2 days before the trial, Pike filed an emergency motion in Lemine to exclude any and all digital recordings not processed through standard discovery. His argument was desperate. In the brief, he claimed that, in the age of artificial intelligence, video evidence is easily fabricated. He argued that since I was a forensic expert, I had the capability to create deepfakes. He wanted the judge to ban the footage before it could even be seen. He was terrified. He didn't know exactly what was on those tapes, but he knew his clients were liars, and he knew that cameras don't blink. Judge Calder issued a ruling hours later. Motion deferred. The court will determine the admissibility of digital evidence after examining the subject, Evelyn Hart, and establishing the chain of custody. She was keeping the door open, but we had to walk through it. The night before the trial, Ridgeport was hit by a sleet storm. Ice coated the windows of my apartment, turning the city into a blurred, gray smear. I was sitting on my floor, organizing the binders for the 10th time, when the buzzer rang. It was Derek. I debated not letting him up. I debated calling the police, but he was my father, and despite everything, The little girl inside me who used to wait for him to come home from work still had a voice. I buzzed him in. When I opened the door, I was shocked. In the 3 weeks since this started, he seemed to have aged 10 years. His shoulders were slumped, his coat was wet, and his face was gray and drawn. He didn't look like a conspirator. He looked like a man who was carrying a weight that was crushing his spine. He walked in and stood in the middle of the living room, dripping water onto the hardwood. He looked at the binders. He looked at the timeline on the wall. He saw the picture of Sabrina and the arrow pointing to the shell company. He didn't get angry. He just sighed, a long, rattling sound. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said softly. "You filed the petition, Dad," I said, standing my ground by the kitchen island. "You started a war. What did you think would happen?" "She said it would be quick," he mumbled, staring at the floor. "Sabrina said Mom would just agree. She said Mom was tired and wanted to rest. We were just supposed to sign some papers and take over the management. I didn't know she was going to put you on the news. I didn't know about the other things." "The theft?" I asked sharply. "The gambling? The lies about me?" He flinched. "It is complicated. Camille, you don't understand the pressure, the business. I made some bad calls. We needed the liquidity. I was going to pay it back. I swear." "You are stealing from your mother to pay for your mistakes," I said. "And you are letting your wife destroy your daughter to cover your tracks." He looked up at me then, and his eyes were filled with tears. But they weren't the tears of a man ready to change. They were the tears of a man who knows he is trapped. "She is my wife, Camille," he said helplessly. "She is all I have. If I lose her, I have nothing." "You have me," I shouted, my voice cracking. "You had me. I was right here. I was waiting for you to be my dad." He shook his head slowly. "It is too late. Pike says we are too deep. If we stop now, we go to jail. We have to win." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I came to give you this," he said. "It is a check. From my personal account. It is enough to cover your rent for a year, to help you while you look for a new job." It was a payoff, a pity bribe. I looked at the envelope like it was radioactive. "Keep it," I said. "Camille, please." "No," I stepped closer to him. "You keep it. You are going to need it for your legal fees." I looked him dead in the eye. I saw the fear there. I saw the knowledge that he was on the wrong side of history, and the wrong side of morality. "Dad, listen to me," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Tomorrow morning, you are going to walk into that courtroom, and for the first time in your life, the truth is going to be in the room with you. It is not going to be gentle. It is not going to be polite. It is going to tear everything down." I paused. "You have one chance, right now. Walk out that door, go to the hotel, and call Pike. Tell him you withdraw. Tell him you are done. If you do that, I will ask Grandma for mercy. I will ask her to spare you." For a second, I saw him waver. I saw the longing for escape on his face. He looked at the door. He looked at me. Then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. "Sabrina." The spell broke. His shoulders slumped again. The mask of the defeated man slid back into place. "I can't," he whispered. "I am sorry, Camille." He turned and walked out. I watched him go. I watched him step into the elevator and press the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, cutting off his sad, gray face, I realized that Evelyn was right. He wasn't a victim. He was an accomplice. And tomorrow, I would have to treat him like one. I locked the door. I turned off the lights in the living room, leaving only the glow of the street lamps filtering in. I went to the bedroom and laid out my suit for the next morning. Navy blue, sharp, professional, armor. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running the cross-examination in my head. I thought about the token in Evelyn's pocket. I thought about the code she had to remember. I thought about the millions of dollars and the years of lies. The preparation was over. The files were ready. The trap was set. All that was left was to spring it. The courtroom was a powder keg, and Lawson Pike was holding the match. When I walked into courtroom 4B at 8:45 in the morning, the air was already thick with the smell of wet coats, stale coffee, and aggressive anticipation. The gallery was not just full, it was overflowing. Every seat was taken. Reporters from the local Ridgeport Gazette sat shoulder to shoulder with correspondents from national cable networks, their laptops open, fingers poised to broadcast the downfall of the Hart family in real time. I took my seat at the defense table. The wood felt cold under my palms. Beside me, the empty chair where a lawyer should have sat felt like a gaping hole. I arranged my binders, red, blue, yellow, green, with a precision that I hoped looked like confidence, rather than a desperate attempt to organize chaos. Then, the doors opened. A hush fell over the room, heavy and instantaneous. Evelyn Hart was wheeled in. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. They had dressed her in a soft gray cardigan that swallowed her frame, and a blanket was tucked securely around her knees. Her head was bowed slightly, to the gallery. She looked like a leaf ready to be blown away by the wind, but as the bailiff guided her wheelchair past the bar, she lifted her head. Her eyes swept the room, glazing over Sabrina, ignoring Derek, and landing squarely on me. She held my gaze for a second, 2 seconds, long enough for me to see the spark. It was faint, buried under layers of exhaustion, but it was there. Then, she dropped her chin again, returning to the role of the frail, confused matriarch. Judge Calder entered, her black robe billowing. She took the bench, her face a mask of judicial neutrality. Though her eyes lingered on the camera crews in the back, she banged the gavel. "We are on the record," Judge Calder said. "Mr. Pike, you may proceed." Lawson Pike stood up. He didn't walk to the podium. He walked to the jury box, even though there was no jury, treating the gallery as his audience. "Your Honor," Pike began, his voice rich with practiced sorrow, "we are here today to discuss a tragedy that is all too common in our country. It is the story of a brilliant mind dimmed by time. Evelyn Hart built an empire, but the woman who built that empire is gone, replaced by a vulnerable senior citizen who is struggling to distinguish yesterday from today." He turned and pointed a manicured finger at me. "And in that confusion," Pike continued, his voice hardening, "a predator appeared, not a stranger, but her own flesh and blood. Camille Hart, a woman obsessed with ledgers and bottom lines, saw an opportunity. While her father and stepmother tried to provide care and love, Camille Hart used her professional skills to weave a web of complex financial instruments around her grandmother, isolating her, confusing her, and steering the family fortune into her own control. The reporters typed furiously. I could feel the narrative setting like concrete around my feet. "We will show," Pike concluded, "that the only way to protect Evelyn Hart is to place her in the loving, capable hands of her son and daughter-in-law." He called Sabrina as his first witness. Sabrina walked to the stand like a martyr approaching the stake. She wiped a non-existent tear from her eye before she even sat down. Under Pike's gentle questioning, she delivered the performance of a lifetime. "I just wanted her to be safe," Sabrina said, her voice trembling. "That is all I ever wanted. But Camille, she was so aggressive. She would come over with these stacks of papers, talking about trusts and diversifications. Mom would get so upset. She would cry after Camille left, saying she didn't understand where her money was going." "Did you try to intervene?" Pike asked softly. "I begged her," Sabrina said, looking directly at the camera in the back row. "I begged Camille to stop stressing her out. I told her, 'Let Derek and me handle the bills. We will keep it simple.' But Camille refused. She said we were too stupid to understand. She said she was the only one who knew how the system worked." She paused for effect. "It was like she was speaking a different language," Sabrina whispered. "A language designed to lock us out." I sat perfectly still, taking notes. Lie, projection. She was describing exactly what she had done, but flipping the actors. It was gaslighting on a grand scale. Next came Derek. My father walked to the stand looking like a man marching to the gallows. He kept his eyes fixed on his shoes. When Pike asked him questions, he stammered. I think Mom has been getting worse, Derek said, his voice barely audible. She forgets things. She left the stove on once, or, at least, Sabrina told me she left the stove on. And how has your daughter treated her? Pike asked. Derek flinched. He looked at me for a split second, his eyes filled with shame, before looking away. Camille is very focused, Derek mumbled. She is good with numbers, maybe too good. She makes Mom sign things. I don't know what they are. Do you believe your mother is safe with her? Derek hesitated, the silence stretched, agonizing and thick. No, he finally whispered. I think Mom needs us. A murmur went through the room, a father testifying against his daughter. It was damning. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a dull ache where my respect for him used to be. He hadn't just lied. He had surrendered his soul to keep his wife happy. Pike then played his trump card. He called Dr. Eris Thorne, a geriatric specialist they had hired. Dr. Thorne was smooth, polished, and expensive. He hadn't examined Evelyn personally for more than 15 minutes, but he had reviewed the notes provided by Sabrina's nurses. Based on the behavioral logs, Dr. Thorne testified, adjusting his glasses, and the incident with the medication, it is highly probable that Mrs. Hart is suffering from advanced vascular dementia. Patients in this state are highly suggestible. They can be manipulated into signing anything if the person asking is someone they trust or fear. So, in your professional opinion, Pike asked, is she capable of managing a $400 million estate? Absolutely not, Dr. Thorne said firmly. She likely cannot even manage her own breakfast. The room buzzed. I could see the headlines writing themselves. Expert confirms billionaire's dementia. Pike sat down, looking triumphant. He leaned over to Sabrina and patted her hand. She offered him a brave, tragic smile. I stood up. It was my turn to cross-examine, but I had no questions for their hired gun. I knew that attacking the doctor would only make me look defensive. No questions, Your Honor, I said. Pike smirked. He thought I was giving up. Your Honor, Pike said, standing again. Given the testimony we have heard regarding the defendant's technical manipulation of the victim, we move to exclude any digital evidence presented by the defense. We believe any video or audio files may be deepfakes generated by Ms. Hart's firm. Since the subject is incompetent, she cannot verify their authenticity. It was a kill shot. If the judge agreed, the fail-safe archive was dead. The videos of Sabrina plotting, the audio of her bribe, all of it would be inadmissible. Judge Calder looked at Pike, then at me. She tapped her pen against the bench. That is a serious accusation, Mr. I, she said, but this court prefers to see everything before deciding what to believe. I am reserving my ruling on the admissibility of the digital evidence. She looked at the clock. I want to hear from Evelyn Hart, the judge said. Sabrina stood up, practically leaping from her chair. Your Honor, please, she is frail. This environment, the stress, it could kill her. Sit down, Mrs. Hart, Judge Calder said, her voice cracking like a whip. This is my courtroom, not your living room. If she can build a global logistics company, she can answer a few questions. The bailiff wheeled Evelyn to the space in front of the judge's bench. They lowered a microphone to her level. The room went deadly silent. The air conditioning hummed. I watched Sabrina. She leaned close to Lawson Pike and whispered, loud enough for me to hear across the aisle. Don't worry, she hissed. She is gone. We have this. She doesn't even know what day it is. Pike buttoned his jacket and approached Evelyn with the exaggerated gentleness one uses with a toddler. Good morning, Evelyn, Pike said. Do you know who I am? Evelyn looked at him. Her head trembled slightly. She blinked slowly, as if trying to focus. You are the lawyer, she said, her voice thin and reedy. The man with the loud tie. A ripple of laughter went through the room. Pike's tie was indeed a garish yellow. He forced a smile. "Yes, I am the lawyer," Pike said patronizingly. "Evelyn, do you know where you are?" "I am in a room," she said, "with a lot of people." "Do you know what year it is?" Evelyn paused. She looked down at her lap. She picked at a loose thread on her blanket. "It is 2000 and—" She trailed off. She looked up at Pike with confused, watery eyes. "Is it winter? It feels cold." Sabrina let out a soft, audible sigh of relief. Derek looked at the floor. The gallery exchanged glances. She looked, for all the world, like a woman lost in the fog. Pike looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I think the state of the witness is clear. Continuing this would be cruel." I gripped the edge of my table. My knuckles were white. "Hold the line, Grandma. Hold the line." Judge Calder held up a hand. "I have a few questions of my own." The judge leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. She looked down at Evelyn, not with pity, but with curiosity. "Mrs. Hart," Judge Calder asked gently, "are you in pain?" "No, ma'am," Evelyn said softly. "Good," Calder said. "I want to ask you about your granddaughter. Camille, Mr. Pike says she has been stealing from you. He says she has been tricking you." Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked over at me. Her expression remained vacant. "Camille," Evelyn murmured. "She works very hard." "Yes, she does," Calder said. "But do you know why we are here today, specifically? Do you know what your son and his wife are asking me to do?" This was it, the precipice. If she gave a confused answer, if she said she didn't know, the guardianship would be granted, the archive would be deleted, I would lose. Evelyn looked at Sabrina. She looked at Derek. She looked at the reporters in the back row. Then, she stopped shaking. She sat up straight in her wheelchair. The tremulous vibration in her hands ceased. She took a deep breath, and as she exhaled, the fog seemed to lift from her face like a curtain being pulled back. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. She turned back to Judge Calder, and then she smiled. It wasn't the confused smile of a senile woman. It was the sharp, predatory smile of a woman who had negotiated mergers that destroyed her competitors. It was a smile that had teeth. "Yes, Your Honor," Evelyn said. Her voice was no longer thin. It was clear, resonant, the voice of the CEO. "I know exactly why we are here." She paused, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming. "We are here," Evelyn continued, her diction crisp and perfect, "because my son and his wife have mistaken my patience for weakness, and they are asking you to hand them the keys to a kingdom they are too morally bankrupt to govern." Sabrina's jaw dropped. Pike froze, his mouth half open. "And regarding the accusation against my granddaughter," Evelyn added, turning her blue eyes toward Pike with a gaze that could cut glass, "I believe you mentioned something about digital evidence being inadmissible. I would like to address that, because I brought the encryption key." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan. The room erupted. The silence that followed Evelyn's declaration was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air before a tornado touches down. Lawson Pike stared at the small, black device in Evelyn's hand as if it were a grenade with the pin pulled. Sabrina had stopped breathing. My father looked like he wanted to sink through the floorboards and disappear into the earth. Evelyn did not look at them. She kept her eyes fixed on Judge Calder. She sat straighter, her spine realigning into the posture of the woman who had stared down union bosses and hostile takeover attempts in the 1980s. The fragility was gone. The confusion was gone. In its place was a terrifying, cold competence. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, her voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "You have a copy of the petition in front of you. It cites Colorado Probate Code Section 1514-301 regarding incapacitated persons. It relies heavily on the assumption that the subject lacks the ability to receive and evaluate information." She paused, letting the legal citation hang in the air. "I memorized that statute 4 years ago," Evelyn continued. "Not because I was afraid of forgetting it, but because I knew that one day Someone would try to use it to strip me of my civil liberties. I knew that my age would be weaponized against me. So, I prepared. She held up the black token. "This is a cryptographic hardware key," she explained, sounding more like a chief information officer than a grandmother. "It is linked to a server managed by Luma Sentinel Solutions. The cameras in my home are not simple motion sensors. They are part of a chain of custody system that timestamps and hashes every frame of video the moment it is recorded. It is impossible to edit. It is impossible to fake. And it is impossible to access without this physical key, which I have kept sewn into the lining of my favorite coat for 6 months." Judge Calder looked at the device, then at Evelyn. A look of profound respect crossed the judge's face. "You are telling me," Judge Calder said, "that you set a trap." "I am telling you," Evelyn corrected, "that I installed a security system for my life, and my family tripped the alarm." Judge Calder banged her gavel. "We are taking a 30-minute recess. I want the technical experts from Luma Sentinel in my chambers immediately to verify this device. Mr. Pike, you and your clients will remain in the building." The 30 minutes that followed were the longest of my life. The courtroom buzzed with whispered speculation. Sabrina was frantically whispering to Pike, her hands flying in the air. Pike looked pale. He was checking his phone, likely looking for an exit strategy, but there was none. My father sat with his head in his hands. When the bailiff called us back in, the atmosphere had shifted. The lights in the courtroom were dimmed. A large projector screen had been lowered behind the witness stand. Judge Calder returned to the bench. She looked furious. "The court has verified the authenticity of the digital evidence," she announced. "The chain of custody is unbroken. The objection by the plaintiff is overruled. Play the files." The screen flickered to life. The first video was time-stamped October 14th, 8 in the morning. It showed the kitchen of the penthouse. The quality was crystal clear, high definition, capturing every detail of the morning light hitting the marble countertops. Sabrina was standing by the espresso machine. She was on the phone. Her face was twisted in a sneer that the public had never seen. "I can't stand it anymore." Sabrina's voice rang out through the courtroom speakers, shrill and impatient. "She is just sitting there, a useless old woman on a mountain of money. She doesn't even spend it. It is rotting in the bank." She paused, listening to the person on the other end. "No," Sabrina snapped. "We can't just ask for it. She is stingy. The guardianship is the best door for me. Once I have medical power of attorney, I can move her to a facility and sell the apartment. We will be liquid in 6 months." A collective gasp went through the gallery. I looked at the real Sabrina. She was staring at the screen, her mouth agape, her face the color of ash. The screen flickered. The next clip played. Timestamp, November 2nd, the living room. Derek was sitting on the sofa, looking anxious. Sabrina was pacing in front of him like a director coaching an actor. "You are not selling it, Derek," Sabrina shouted in the video. "You look guilty. You need to look sad. When you talk to your aunt, tell her that Mom put her diamond ring in the freezer. Tell her she is hiding things." "But she didn't," Derek said in the video, his voice weak. "She put it in the safe. I saw her." "I moved it," Sabrina hissed. "I put it in the freezer this morning. When she can't find it, she will panic. That is when you call the doctor. We need a documented incident of confusion. Do you want the money to pay off your debts or not?" In the courtroom, Derek squeezed his eyes shut. The reporters were typing so fast it sounded like rain on a tin roof. The narrative of the devoted son was being dismantled frame by frame. The third video was the most damaging to her character. It showed Sabrina standing in front of a large mirror in the hallway. She was alone. She was practicing her facial expressions. She frowned, furrowed her brow, and forced tears to well up in her eyes. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed. "Lawson!" she said into the phone, her voice instantly switching to a bright, confident laugh. "Oh, I am ready. Listen, if we get this guardianship, the whole town is ours. We will own the charity gala circuit. I just need you to make sure Camille looks like a villain. Paint her as a shark. Make people think she is abusing the old bat." She laughed again. a cold, ugly sound that echoed off the courtroom walls. "Don't worry," Video Sabrina said. "Nobody listens to Camille. She's just a boring accountant. Who is going to believe her over a grieving mother?" The real Sabrina let out a small, choked sob, but nobody looked at her with sympathy anymore. They looked at her with revulsion. The final video was shot in the hospital room at Serenity Heights. It was dark, illuminated only by the hallway light. Sabrina was talking to a nurse in the doorway. "Be careful with the granddaughter," Sabrina whispered in the video. "Camille, she is dangerous." "Dangerous?" the nurse asked. "Is she violent?" "No way," Sabrina said, her eyes narrowing. "Worse, she is smart. She is too smart. She sees everything, but once the court declares Mom incompetent, all of Camille's spreadsheets won't mean a thing. We just need to run out the clock." The screen went black. The silence in the courtroom was total. It was the silence of a truth so absolute that it sucked the oxygen out of the room. Evelyn sat in her wheelchair, watching the blank screen. She turned back to the microphone. "I am not incompetent, Mr. Pike," Evelyn said softly. "I am merely patient. I faked the memory lapses. I dropped the pills. I asked the same question 3 times in a row. I did it to see how fast Sabrina would run toward the money." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick file. "While they were filming their PR stunts," Evelyn said, "I was meeting with 2 independent neurologists that Judge Calder appointed at my request. I took the cognitive tests 3 days ago. I took them again yesterday morning." She handed the file to the bailiff. "I scored 30 out of 30, Evelyn said. "My mind is not failing. It is the only thing in this family that is still functioning perfectly." Judge Calder took the file. She flipped through it. She looked at the videos again. Then she looked at Sabrina. "This is," Judge Calder began, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "This is the most egregious abuse of the legal system I have ever witnessed." Sabrina stood up. She was trembling violently. The mask had not just slipped. It had shattered. She looked wild, cornered, like an animal caught in headlights. "She is lying!" Sabrina screamed. Her voice cracked, high and desperate, tearing through the dignified air of the court. She pointed a shaking finger at Evelyn. "She is lying. She manipulated all of us. She has been playing games with us for months. That video, it is out of context. She drove me to it. She is evil." She spun around to face the gallery, her eyes wide and manic. "Don't you see? She planned this. She wanted to humiliate me. She is the one who is sick. She is a sadist." "Sit down," the bailiff shouted, moving toward her. "No!" Sabrina shrieked, pointing at me now. "And you helped her. You think you are so high and mighty? You are just a parasite. I took care of her. I cleaned her house. I deserve that money. It is mine. It is mine." The screaming was drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd. It wasn't the murmur of belief. It was the murmur of pity and disgust. She was unraveling. The footage continued to loop on the screen behind her. Sabrina laughing about the old bat, while the real Sabrina screamed about being a victim. The juxtaposition was grotesque. "Sabrina," Evelyn's voice cut through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Sabrina froze. She looked at Evelyn. "No, Sabrina," Evelyn said, her face devoid of anger, showing only a profound disappointment. "For the first time, everyone is seeing you exactly as I have always seen you." Evelyn turned to the judge. "Your Honor, as of this morning, I have executed a new estate plan," Evelyn said calmly. "I have transferred the voting rights of my shares in Heartline Holdings into an irrevocable trust. The trust has strict bylaws regarding disbursements, no luxury vehicles, no vacations, no speculation." She looked at me. "The sole trustee and chairman of the board is my granddaughter, Camille Hart." Sabrina made a sound like she had been punched in the stomach. She slumped back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Judge Calder slammed the gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. "The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice," Judge Calder declared. "There is absolutely no evidence of incapacity. In fact, Mrs. Hart appears to be the most competent person in this room. The judge leaned over the bench, glaring at Sabrina and Derek. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am finding the petitioners, Sabrina and Derek Hart, liable for all legal fees incurred by the respondent, and given the video evidence of theft, conspiracy to defraud, and what appears to be grand larceny, I am referring this entire file to the district attorney's office for immediate review regarding criminal charges. Lawson Pike closed his briefcase. He didn't even look at his clients. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. Court is adjourned, Calder said. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Flashbulbs popped. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but my head was clear. I walked over to Evelyn. She looked up at me, and for the first time in months, she let out a genuine, tired sigh. She reached out her hand. I took it. Let's go home, Grandma, I said. We walked out of the courtroom together. The hallway was a gauntlet. Microphones were thrust in our faces. Ms. Hart, a reporter yelled. How does it feel to win the fortune? Did you know about the tapes? What do you have to say to your stepmother? In the background, I could see Sabrina. She was sobbing, trying to hide her face with her scarf. But the cameras were merciless. They were zooming in on the woman who had been exposed as a fraud in high definition. The image of her crying was no longer a symbol of devotion. It was the image of a con artist who got caught. I stopped in front of the cameras. I looked directly into the lens. I thought about the years of isolation, the insults, the accusations of being cold. I didn't win a fortune, I said, my voice steady. I protected a legacy, and as for my family, they learned a hard lesson today. I paused. Love doesn't need a court order to prove itself, and the truth doesn't need a filter. I turned away and guided Evelyn toward the elevator. We left them there, Sabrina screaming at her lawyer, Derek staring at the floor, and the world watching the ruins of their greed. That evening, the penthouse was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the sky over Ridgeport scrubbed clean and full of stars. I sat in the armchair by the window. Evelyn was across from me. We were eating grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. The first simple, honest meal we had eaten in peace in 6 months. The television was off. The phones were unplugged. Evelyn took a sip of her tea. She looked out at the city lights. That was hard, she said softly. It was necessary, I said. She looked at me. Her blue eyes were soft now, the steel put away for another day. I am sorry I had to put you through that, Camille, she said. I am sorry I had to make you fight them alone. I wasn't alone, I said, tapping the table where her handwritten note had been. I had the data. Evelyn smiled. It wasn't about the data, Camille. It was the final test. I needed to know that when I am gone, you won't just be smart. I needed to know you would be brave. I needed to know you could stand in the fire and not burn. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You passed, she whispered. I squeezed back. I looked at the woman who had taught me that money was a tool and integrity was the blueprint. We hadn't won because we were richer. We hadn't won because we were meaner. We had won because when the noise stopped and the lies were stripped away, we were the only ones left standing on solid ground. And that, I realized, was the only inheritance that truly mattered. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and family secrets. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment below with your city or country. Let's see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing the truth come out, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this victory with even more people.